Well, hello, Cornerstone. How you guys doing? Did you guys have a good 4th of July? I got applause just for saying hello. Wow. I'm going to end here because it's probably not going to get much better. No. Did you have a great 4th of July? I hope so. I hope you had a lot of fun. I hope you didn't blow up anything, or at least you didn't blow up anything that you wanted to keep. So, I want to welcome everyone in Walnut Creek. We're so glad that you could join us, everyone who is joining us online, as well as our brothers and sisters that are in the incarcerated church. What a blessing it is, right, for us to be able to get together and to worship God together as one body. Amen for that. That's great. Let's jump into Numbers 13. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up. We're going to be talking about Joshua and Caleb, and I just want to bring you a little bit up to speed on where we've been. Just remember, it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and then Numbers. Don't be impressed that I remembered that. I have it written down right here. But here's where we are. The Israelites, remember, they were in Egypt as slaves. For generations, they were there as slaves. And then God led them out of Egypt using Moses and Aaron and bringing them out. And you remember the Red Sea, remember the miracles, the 10 plagues and all the stuff that went on. And he's led them through the desert. And he's led them through the desert, and he's promised them land. He's promised them land that he describes as flowing with milk and honey. And right now, where we're picking up, they're on the edge of that land. They're right on the edge of the desert. And they're looking in on that land, Canaan, that land that was promised to them, the land that was described as flowing with milk and honey. And they're looking across the Jordan, they're looking in, and they're saying, that's the place that God's been talking about. And that's where we are right now. Let's pick up in 13, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. Now, like it says, these are leaders. These are men who are responsible for others. They have a reputation in their community, in their tribe. They're established. They're influencers. And in that group of 12 are two guys named Caleb and Joshua. And skip down to verse 17 with me. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or are they fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of that land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So Moses tells them, go check out this land. He gives them that mission to bring back news, and they go. The 12 men say, okay, these leaders of the Israelites say, okay, we go, and they head out for 40 days. And after 40 days of exploring, of spying in the promised land, they come back. And Numbers 13:27 says, they gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here are the fruits. See, they brought back pomegranates and grapes and figs. It actually says that it took 2 guys with a pole suspended between them to carry the grapes. They were so big. Well, either the grapes were so big or the Israelites were so small. So we're not exactly sure which. So they might have been little tiny Israelites carrying the grapes, or the grapes were huge. See, what's happening is they bring this out, and these guys are saying, you wouldn't believe the grapes. You wouldn't believe the pomegranates. It's fantastic. It's fertile. It is flowing with milk and honey. They'd be like today coming and saying, you wouldn't believe this place. They have the best burgers in town, and they've got pupusas and enchiladas and pizza, and you can even get waffles and fried chicken. It's the best there. And everyone would be all excited going, I want some of that. You can get Southern gravy on your French fries, which I think defines the promised land. I'm not exactly sure, but I think in the Hebrew, that's what it is. Milk and honey, I want gravy and French fries. But let's look at what happens next. Chapter 13, verse 28. But, there's always a big but, isn't there? It's kind of tragic. I'm not going to say any more about that because I'll get emails, but these guys go on. The people who live there are powerful, they say, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. They're saying, those guys are tough in there. We can't go in that land. They're scary and big, and they're everywhere. They're in the hills, they're in the valleys, they're by the river, they're by the ocean. These guys are all over the place. It's not safe. Sure, it's exactly what we were looking for. It's exactly what we expected, but it's too dangerous. It's too risky. Verse 30. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. I love that guy, Caleb, don't you? Don't you just love that heart of, forget what these guys say, let's go get it. But to be honest, aren't we more often like those other Israelite leaders than we are like Caleb and Joshua? I mean, those other 10 spies, those other leaders from the tribes, they were just being realistic. I mean, those guys were dangerous. They were big. They were descendants of Anak. What that means is Anak was a descendant of a group of people called the Nephilim. They were giants, real giants. They were super big and super strong, and they were famous for being the toughest warriors, the toughest soldiers. And so these 10 Israelite leaders, they weren't making up things. They were saying, hey, guys, weren't we just slaves a little while ago? We've just been wandering through the desert. We're not trained soldiers. And that's who they were up against. Plus, did I mention that they were giants? Who wants to face a giant? I remember I spoke at a men's event in San Diego once, and after I was done speaking, I found out that there was a guy who wanted to talk to me, and he was a lineman from the Oakland Raiders. And I remember my first thought was, oh, cool, someone from the Oakland Raiders. I grew up around here, and I thought that'd be exciting. And then as he started to get closer and I started to see his size, I started to get a little nervous and think, I hope he liked what I said. Because he was 6'10", and it was like 3 of me standing next to each other, and he was like 100% muscle. And so just to give you a little scale, I'm 6'1", and about 95, 96% muscle. And what, did I say something funny? I'm not. Oh, I see what you guys are doing. It hurts. Okay, so 90% muscle, all right? And so he comes over to me and we start talking, and I don't remember anything that he said. I just remember thinking, he could crush me. And I think actually the one thing I do remember saying was, I think I looked at him and said, you could crush me. See, when we're around someone that much bigger than us, we get a little insecure. We get a little bit nervous. And he's just a big man. He wasn't an actual giant. And so I know what those 10 leaders of the Israelites felt. I understand, I can identify with them. But let's keep on going. Let's look at Numbers 13:31. See, because up until this point, all they said was, those guys are big. 31, but the men who had gone up with them said, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report. They start telling other people, hey, we can't go in there. Don't do this. This is a bad idea. They spread a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. See, that night, everyone was terrified. They wept, and they started to complain about Moses and his leadership, and they said, we should have just died in Egypt, or at least in the wilderness or in the desert. Why would God bring us here just to die in battle on the sword of a giant? And they said, wouldn't it be better if we did go back to Egypt? Well, let's do that. Let's elect a new leader, and then let's go back to Egypt, right? Because Egypt was so good to them. No. See, that's not the case at all. See, when we struggle with fear, A lot of times it's just the fear of the unknown. And we would trade the unknown for something that's known, even what's known if it's slavery, even if it's horrible. See, when you struggle with fear, you run to whatever gives you security. It could be good stuff or it could be bad stuff. It could be finances and possessions or relationships. It could just be someone else being in charge. It could just be the routine of knowing what tomorrow is going to bring. It could be the desert or it could be Egypt. But the thing is, those things trick you into thinking that you're not scared. Those things trick you into feeling like you're secure. They trick you into feeling like you're not making decisions based by fear. And that's what they're doing. They're saying, let's go back to Egypt. And no one there is going, wait. I seem to remember starving and being whipped and being slaves and didn't they kill a bunch of our kids? No one stands up and says that stuff because at least they know what to expect there. And I think if we're honest, if I'm honest, most of the time, I think we act like those 10 leaders. Those 10 leaders who said, we can't go in there. That's a huge risk. See, we would prefer to maintain the status quo, wouldn't we? We like it to be safe. Yeah, you know, guys, the fruit looks good. And the grapes, they were enormous. It's great, but it's just too risky. Sorry, Caleb. Sorry, Joshua, but we're just going to play it safe on this one. We're going to go with what we know, and we're going to hang out here in the desert. Maybe go back to Egypt. At least we know what we were doing there. I can't just quit my job. I can't just sell my house. I just can't walk out of this relationship. I can't move to another city or move to another country just because I've got this invitation from God to be in this adventure. I can't give away these resources, give away my time. I don't know what it's going to look like tomorrow. It's scary. See, when I look at the story in Numbers 13, I relate way more with those guys that were ruled by fear than I do with Caleb and Joshua. You know, when I was younger, my parents, I was in junior high, I think I was about 11. My parents came to me and said, hey, you know, we want to send you to Guatemala. And I said, that's fantastic. Who's coming with me? And they said, oh, no, it's just you. You're going to fly to Guatemala. And I said, no, it's not going to happen. They said, no, it's going to be great. My mom grew up in Guatemala. She had cousins and aunts and uncles there. So you're going to meet all your cousins. There are a bunch that are your age. And I said, no, I'm going to stay here in the Bay Area where I know people and I'm safe. And so they said, no, we've got it all planned. And I said, I'm not going. And so my parents said, okay, well, it's all planned. Who wants to go? And my older brother said, I'll go. So my older brother went down to Guatemala for the summer, and he came back. And I remember having to sit there at dinner when he came back and him telling me these stories, telling all of us these stories about how he and all of his cousins ran up the side of a volcano and had the best time. And then they ran through the rainforest and they played on Mayan ruins. And then they swam in this pool that was heated by the venting of the same volcano he just ran off of. That sounds like a movie. That doesn't sound like a vacation. I'm sitting there going, man, I missed out. And he was telling me about how the food was fantastic and it was so great. And I thought, man, I didn't know it was gonna be like that. But then it was a year or two later, my folks came to me and they said, you know what? We're gonna send you to Greece, because my dad's from Greece, so my grandparents were there. They said, we're gonna send you to Greece. I'm like, that's fantastic. Who's going with me? And my parents said, no, and just you. Now, a smart guy would have said, there's a pattern here. My family likes sending me away. But I'm not a smart man, so I just thought, oh, no, I'm not going. That sounds scary. And so my dad says, no, you're gonna fly from here and your grandfather's gonna meet you in Athens when you get off the plane. I said, my grandfather that I haven't seen. And he goes, yeah, but your cousin will be there. And I'm like, my cousin that I've never seen. So I'm gonna meet people who I don't recognize. How am I gonna know if I go home with the wrong person? My dad says, no, it's all worked out. And I'm like, not for me. And so then my dad says, well, it's all planned. And I said, I'm not going. He said, all right, well, who wants to go? And then, to add insult to injury, my little sister says, I'll go. So my little sister and my little brother then go to Greece. Once I said I'm not going, then they said, well, we'll let you take your brother with you. So my brother and my sister go to Greece. And I got to hear all these stories when they came back about how they swam in this cove and it was so clear they could see fish. They got to go to Athens. They got to go all these incredible places. And I remember thinking, man, I absolutely missed out. See, I struggle with fear. And I let fear rule me. So I'm right there with those 10 Israelite leaders. Those 10 guys that are probably thinking, I can't risk my family. I can't risk my possessions. I'm comfortable with my standing in this community, with my tribe. I could lose everything if I go fight those giants. Now, don't get me wrong. There is something in me, and I think in all of us, that says we want to be different. We do want to take risks for God. There's something in us that doesn't just want to play it safe. There's that little voice, and I think it's the same with them. Because those 10 guys did go into the promised land, and they did go and spy on the giants. They just didn't want to go and fight the giants. That's kind of a rational thought, isn't it? That's kind of a logical thing, saying, hey, are those the greatest warriors that we know of? Are those the biggest guys we've ever seen? Are they the strongest people in the world? Yeah, maybe I'm not gonna go fight them. That's a rational thought. But we have to ask, what's the difference between us and those 10 leaders and Caleb and Joshua? What did they see that those 10 Israelite leaders didn't see? I mean, they saw the same grapes, they saw the same figs, the same fertile land, and they saw the same giants. But they made an absolutely different decision. Well, remember where we left off. The crowd is complaining. They're wishing they could go back to Egypt. They're asking God, why did you bring us here just to kill us? And this is Numbers 14:6. Read with me. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and he will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Do you see the difference there? Did you see it? Do you recognize it? The 10 guys, the 10 Israelite leaders had their eyes on two things. They had their eyes on the danger and the risk. They're thinking about how dangerous everything is. Those giants are dangerous. They're stronger than we are. They're bigger than we are. They're famous for their exploits as soldiers. And we were slaves not that long ago. And they're everywhere, in the hills, in the valleys. It's too dangerous. We can't do it. And they're also thinking about the risk. That's why it's important we recognize that God says they were leaders, every one of them. They all were men who had something. And they were thinking, I can't take that risk. I'm a leader. I'm a man of standing. I won't put my wife and children at risk. I don't want to lose what I've got. I've got influence. I've got stuff I don't want to lose. But what did Joshua and Caleb have their eyes on? What did they mention in those 3 verses? What did they mention 3 times? The Lord. Someone said it, that's right. 3 times they mentioned the Lord. And that's the difference. That's the entire difference. You don't look at who's against you, you look at who's for you. And that's something that we get wrong very often. We will often look at the danger. We'll look at who's opposed to us rather than looking at who is for us. And that's why they say, if the Lord is pleased with us, if we have God's favor, he'll lead us into that land. Don't be afraid of those people. And then you remember what happens? Everyone said, Joshua, Caleb, you're right. Let's go get them. Yeah, I don't remember that part either because that didn't happen. Nope. What happened was, verse 10, chapter 14, the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Yeah. This will happen, not getting stoned. You guys, I don't know what you're thinking about. Why are you laughing? There's nothing. All right. This will happen to us. I'm sorry, I'm so distracted now with jokes that I can't ever say because of the emails I'm gonna get. But this kind of opposition, this happens to us. This happens to us when we take a risk for God's kingdom, doesn't it? People will get upset when we take a risk for God's kingdom. If you're being brave for the kingdom and someone's not, they're gonna be bothered by what you do. It's just the nature of being human. It won't make sense to them. It'll make them afraid. They won't wanna hear about the vision or about taking a bold risk for something that God's called you to. It will scare them and anger them, and they'll just want to get you away from them. They'll wanna do you harm. Folks will spread rumors or lies. They'll twist what you say. And you look at that and you see that the extreme case is happening. The Israelites are picking up stones and saying, let's kill these guys. But look at what happens. Right after they pick up stones, look at what it says, verse 10. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. This is beautiful. The way the tent of meeting worked was there was this tent called the tent of meeting. You guys may have put that together. And when God wanted to talk to Moses, his glory would shine on the tent, okay? So Moses would be talking to some folks, and all of a sudden he'd see out of the corner of his eye this glory of God shining on the tent, and he'd say, oh, excuse me, I've got a 10 o'clock with God. And he would know he's got to meet with God, and he'd go into the tent and they would talk. You see, that's what happens. The crowd is ready to throw stones, and then all of a sudden God intervenes. But the beautiful thing is he doesn't intervene by shouting or striking them down or anything. What he does is he shows up like this great light, like the 4th of July fireworks. And then can you imagine all the Israelites with rocks in their hands? They're like, oh, what, us? No, we weren't gonna throw these at Joshua and Caleb. We were working out because there are no good gyms on this side of the Jordan, but on the other side, in that promised land, there's some buff guys. They must know a good gym. They're caught right in the act of about to kill. And all of a sudden, the Bible doesn't even say that, oh yeah, and so they stopped. It's just assumed. They knew they got caught. You know, and that's a powerful thing for us to understand. That God shows up and just his presence changes the action, changes what's going on. And so Moses goes into the tent of meeting and he talks and prays to God, and God says, how long will they refuse to trust me? And with all these signs I've done among them. See, God says, Moses, how long are these people not going to trust me, who I am, even after I've worked these miracles on their behalf? I'm just gonna wipe them out. I'm gonna start with a clean slate. And then Moses says, please, Lord, don't. And he prays for forgiveness for the Israelites. He says, God, just think of what will happen when you actually work through these people. And so God says, okay, I'll forgive them. But they won't get into the land I promised them. Their kids will. Joshua and Caleb will, but they won't. See, God says, if you want a life that doesn't depend on me, if you want a life that doesn't rely on my power and my character, I'll let you have it, but it's not good. It's not a life that you're gonna want, and it's sure not what you expect. See, because what happens when you live that kind of a life? When you don't trust God or you don't rely on him, when you don't take risks based on his goodness, what happens to your life? Because I know in my life, when I do that, I wreck it. I absolutely wreck my life when I don't trust God, when I don't take risks based on his character. I think it's the same for all of us. I think all of us could look back on our life and recognize, yeah, when my life was a dry desert and I was starving, it's because I was steering the car. I was in charge and I did not trust God. I was too scared to do that. See, here's the cool thing is risk has this healthy effect on us, doesn't it? It streamlines us. I remember I used to scuba dive before I was embarrassed to be seen in a swimsuit. And so, thanks for not laughing, I think. But I remember going scuba diving and being on this boat with a dive master, and the dive master was this old Navy SEAL, and I had this friend who had just gotten out of the dive class and gotten certified, and he was all excited and spent a ton of money on gear. And the way diving suits work, or gear works, he had this vest called a buoyancy compensator, and it's essentially a backpack with balloons that inflate so you go up to the top. On his vest, though, he had purchased a ton of gear just to clip on. Stuff that he might need, like he had a flashlight in case while we were scuba diving, there was like a solar eclipse or something. So he had the flashlight. He had a dive knife in case a shark attacked him. And if he got away from the shark, he also had scissors in case he got tangled up in like a fishing net or something like that. He had a compass, and all of this was attached onto his swimming vest. He also had a pony bottle and a whistle. A pony bottle is a smaller bottle of air in case the two enormous bottles of air on your back run out. And he had a whistle and a flare and some other stuff. All these things, expensive items, all strapped to his vest. And I remember he's kind of moving them around so that he could have like freedom of movement and stuff right before we go into the dive. And this old Navy SEAL is just looking at him. Just kind of looking at him. And I'm watching the Navy SEAL, and he's just kind of looking at him. And then my friend notices that he's looking, and he says, "Can you help me figure out where to put this stuff?" And the Navy SEAL goes, "Oh yeah." He reaches down, grabs his knife, and starts cutting it off. He's just like cutting it right off of his vest. And my friend's like, "What?" And I'm looking at that going, "Oh my gosh, he's gonna kill him." But all this stuff, 19, 20 items just fall down, and it's this big pile on the deck of the boat. And my friend looks at him and goes, "Okay, where should I put this stuff?" And the Navy SEAL says, "Leave it there or throw it away. You don't need it." And then he says, "Let's go," and jumps in the water. See, risk has that same effect on us. We tend to start gathering things that we think are important. When we take a risk, it streamlines us. We start to recognize what's not really important. We start to understand what we don't really need and what we do need. And we need to be dependent on God. And so we have to look at how can we be more like Joshua and Caleb and less like normal people, less like ourselves and those Israelites. And what's beautiful is God gives us the solution. When he's talking to Moses in verse 11 of chapter 14, the Lord says to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs I have performed among them?" See, God says, here's the solution. It's what they haven't done. They don't believe in me, and they don't remember my favor. They don't remember the signs that I've done in the midst of them. So the solution is to believe in God, in who he is, in his character. And the second thing is to remember the signs. Remember the miracles that God has done in our own lives, that he's done for them, how he's cared for them. You know, the first one, to focus on God's character. That's something that can sometimes sound easy, but it's not. So you look at the 12 men when they came back, and they all agreed on one thing, didn't they? They all looked and they said, "Man, the fruit is awesome. It's fantastic." Remember, it took 2 men carrying a pole to bring those giant grapes back. They all agreed on it. And they said it themselves. They used the exact same words that God described the land. They said, "It is flowing with milk and honey, just like God told us it was going to." Those 12 men literally had been eating for 40 days on those fruits that God said were gonna be there. They held it in their hands, they tasted it, but only 2 of them recognized it as God's favor. See, sometimes we can hold God's promises in our hands, the evidence of his favor, and we may not recognize it because they were obsessed with the risk and the danger rather than the fact that God had told them exactly what was gonna be there. They couldn't see how trustworthy God was, how he provided for them and was providing for them. And we need to remember that God is bigger than any giant. Because when these guys saw the giants, they thought, "Oh, well, we can't go in there," regardless of what God told us was gonna be there. See, in Joshua and Caleb, they never said that it was gonna be easy, did they? No, they said the opposite of that. You know, they never said the giants were small. They didn't say there wasn't gonna be heartache or loss. What they said was, "Do not be afraid of the people because their protection is gone, but the Lord will protect us." And we have to stop thinking about how big the risk is. We have to think not how big the risk is, but how big our God is. Because what you believe about God will dictate whether or not you can take risks when he invites you to. And the second point that God gives them is about his favor, the miracles, the signs he's given them. And so we have to remember God's past favor to us. Think about what these people have seen. They were slaves in Egypt. They saw the 10 plagues. They walked through the Red Sea. They saw what God did to Pharaoh. They saw God bring water out of stone. They saw God rain down food for them to eat. He guided them. They saw God's glory. They've seen God's favor in so many ways, but they still didn't trust God. They didn't trust that God would fight for them. And sometimes we're like that too, aren't we? We know God loves us, but we wonder, but is he gonna really fight for me? I know you guys are like that, I know that. Because I'm like that. We're all like that. It's part of being human, and we have to fight it, though. Joshua and Caleb fought it. Look at them. They remembered God's favor, and that's exactly what gave them courage. That's exactly what helped them trust God. Let's fast forward 40 years. 40 years from this story in Numbers, Joshua is going to lead a new generation of Israelites into that same promised land. He's going to lead them in there, and the way he's going to do it is really cool. He's going to lead them through the middle of the Jordan River. See, what God does is he stops up the Jordan River. He says, hey, your parents saw me do this with the Red Sea, but they still didn't trust me. So now I'm going to do it with the Jordan River, leading you into the promised land. Don't you guys forget it. And when they cross through, Joshua does this really cool thing. When they get to the other side, Joshua turns around and he says, hey, I need a guy, a leader from every tribe, all 12 tribes. Does that sound familiar? What I want you guys to do is, we're in the promised land. I want you to go back into the Jordan and grab a big giant rock and bring it out here. The 12 guys from the tribes come out with these rocks. He says, now, here's where we're gonna camp. Our very first night in the promised land, I want you to pile those rocks up. Pile all those rocks in one place. So in the middle of the night, we can look at those rocks and say, how did we get here? Oh yeah, miracle of God. And from now on, whenever we see those piled up rocks, what we're gonna be reminded of is, we only got here because of the favor of God. That's the only reason we're here. Joshua chapter 4, verse 6 says, in the future, when your children ask you, what do those stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. He's saying, remember God's past favor. Because when we do that, when we remember how God has been favorable to us in the past, it changes us. It changes the way we think. It changes the way we make decisions. And this is super important, not just for ourselves, but for those around us, because those 10 Israelite leaders who said, no, we can't go back there, they prevented an entire generation of Israelites from being in the promised land, didn't they? But you look at Joshua and Caleb, and they got to lead that next generation into the promised land. See, what we have to understand, we just have to understand, we're infectious. We're all contagious. And we're either gonna infect people with our trust in God and our willingness to take a risk when he invites us to, or our fear and our hunger for security is gonna be contagious, and people will follow that. Let's look at this real quickly in Joshua chapter 14. This is Caleb talking to Joshua as they're about to invade the promised land. Verse 11, chapter 14 of Joshua. Joshua's talking and he says, I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to do battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. Then the land had rest from war. See, the Anakites were the kids of Anak. Arba was the father of Anak. Remember, the giants. And Arba was the most famous giant, the most famous warrior. And Caleb says, I'm 85. Give me the land where the biggest giants live. Give me the city where their most dangerous warrior lived, and it's named after him, and his descendants live there. I'm not scared. As long as God helps me, I'm kicking them out. They're getting an eviction notice. Look at that courage. I want to be that old guy, don't you? Not if you're a woman, but you might want to be an old woman like that. But I want to be that old guy, 85 years old. I don't want to be sitting on my porch at 85 complaining about young folks. I want to be 85 years old leading them, just like Caleb and Joshua. I want to be Caleb fighting the giants so wholeheartedly that the young guys around me say, look at that old guy with the walker beating on that giant. If he can fight them with fake teeth, how can I not pick a fight with a giant if God tells me to? See, we weren't made to live scared. We were created to change things. We were created to restore creation, not to live in fear, but to have an impact on the world, to live brave and to take action, to take risks and grow God's kingdom. And it may seem crazy from the outside, but the truth is, it's not a big risk if God is with us. It's not crazy if God is with us. It's absolutely sane. What's insane is any other response, doubting God and his favor and his character. You know, when you came in on your seat, you found this card, didn't you? I want you to grab that card right now. We're gonna give you time to fill it out. In the first column, what I want you to do is write a couple things down, write a bunch of things down about God, about his character, that when you think about them, they encourage you, they make you bold. You can start writing that now. And then in the other column, when you get there, I want you to write down things that maybe only you know. Things from your life that you say, this is how I remember God's favor in my life. This was a giant that I know I could not have beaten unless God helped me. This was a time in my life where if God didn't show up, I was in for bad times, but he showed up and he showed me his favor. He worked miracles for me. He fought for me. And we're gonna give you time to fill this out right now. And as you're doing that, I want you to ask God, what has fear kept you from doing? What have you traded? What adventure, what courageous service or brave generosity has our addiction to security stolen from us? And then this week, pull this card out, place it somewhere where you'll see it. And I want you to pull it out regularly just to remind yourself that God loves you and that God is inviting you to an adventure that is absolutely not safe, that is absolutely not without pain, but it's absolutely worth it. So fill out that card now. We're not done. We're gonna have some time of reflection to fill this out and then some more time of worship. But I want you to hold on to this card for the rest of this week. God bless you guys.